there's always been a lot of chat about Shane Warne. So shall we get into the nitty-gritty?
Oh no, please.
First up, why didn't he captain Australia?
He was probably a little bit unlucky in the era he played, right? In that Steve Harmison and Ricky Ponting overlap him, and I think that's a part of it. But he wasn't the kind of person that Australia wanted in front of microphones. He's very, very clear. And that Cricket Australia at that point was run by James Sutherland, who grew up with Shane Warne, right? You know, they're both cricketers in Melbourne, but I would say that they come from very different kinds of backgrounds. And James Sutherland was obviously, you know, a very conservative person.
Yes.
And has talked about that a lot before. And I think he probably thought there was an element of a lack of control that you could have over Shane Warne. I mean, Shane Warne had a lack of control over himself, let alone anyone else having control over him, right? And that they were nervous about that kind of thing. And if you go through Australian captains, they are a certain kind of person,
yes,
right? It's not a class thing because a lot of them are from working class, but they are usually people who know when to shut their mouth and speak in a certain way. And Shane Warne was not that kind of person, and I think that would have caused a problem. There's also a huge cultural cringe when it comes to Shane Warne, in that he's very popular with a certain part of Australia, and he's very unpopular with a certain other kind of Australia, with the, you know, frolicking topless and the baked beans and the cigarettes and all that sort of stuff. And I think he wasn't always popular with both sides of the divide. And one side of the divide is probably the people who ultimately decide on who the captain is, right? And I think that is a big part of it. So he wasn't. It wasn't quite. What was it? What was it that Giles Clark said about about Alistair Cook? He comes from the right kind of family. It's not quite that with Shane Warne, because I think a lot of the other captains certainly come from a working class background, as I said before. But he wasn't. I think if you Cricket Australia, they would have said, at least privately, he's not exactly the sort of person we want to go out and give press conferences and be an ambassador for our cricket team.
So there's a touch of they got burned with Kim Hughes. Do you think that there was a little bit of that?
No, I don't think Kim Hughes was. I mean, they got away with Ian Chappell, to be fair, and you could argue that Ian Chappell did and said a few things that were on edge at times. So I think Ian Chappell's a bit more edgy than Kim Hughes ever was. No, I just think it was Shane Warne wanted to be famous, loved being famous, and couldn't control himself at all times. Whereas they had other people that, you know, were, let's be honest, Steve Harmison and Ricky Ponting are both legends as well, right? Well, no one's saying that they're not incredible players. But they were a little bit more in control of what they did.
Border.
Yeah, Alan Border. Look, there's that great video.
Mike
the Bumble.
Taylor.
Do you remember the Alan Border one with Craig McDermott, where he didn't know the camera was on, and he's just swearing at Craig McDermott. You're on the next effing plane home. What's wrong with you, and all that sort of stuff. But then Alan Border would get in front of a camera, and he would be a little bit grumpy sometimes, but he would say vaguely captaincy things. We know that Shane Warne doesn't do that. Shane Warne gets so carried away. He would give headlines around the world. He would make mistakes. And Cricket Australia, they were an amateur organisation, really, during his career. I don't think they were ready to stop that kind of thing. It's a bit like, you know, when Boris Johnson takes over the Tory party. You can't really control Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson's Boris Johnson, right? And Shane Warne, a very different kind of person, but very similar. It's going to be the Shane Warne show from the moment you make him the captain. And I think that made a lot of them very uncomfortable. You know, you go back to the Kerry Packer days. When Kerry Packer came in, a lot of them were like, we just don't want him in because he's an outsider, right? They had a very straight idea of who should be in charge and everything else. And Shane Warne clearly did not fit that cookie cutter.
Loose cannon. Cricket Australia will want to sleep easy. I also think, and he gnawed away at him, but make no mistake, he wanted to be Australia captain, he really did. But I think it's the best thing, because it would have reined him in. You've got to let him go, just let him be what he is. The greatest spin bowler perhaps that we've ever seen. All the obligations of being a captain.
Oh, could you imagine him doing all that?
The media and the organisation.
The events.
And the events and the dealing with the other 18 players. He's having a rough time, I've got to go and see him. I've got to take him out, I've got to do this, I've got an obligation here. The best thing that happened to him that he wasn't Australia captain, because he'd just turn up and bowl and win the game and go and do his thing and be Shane Warne, wherever it may be.
And also, captaincy is, we focus on the strategy, right? He would have been brilliant at. We've seen that before.
But he'd be off the cuff, he's on the field, move, they do this, do that. And the commentary box, he's in the commentary box, he captained, didn't matter any team, whoever was fielding, he'd be captaining the team from behind the box, move him, need a second slip, bring him from there.
Yeah.
He'd be doing it all the time.
But you know that isn't all of international captaincy.
No, crikey.
Right, and the other bits, he probably wasn't as good at, right? And in some cases, he just couldn't be. He was, you know, drinking and shagging and out till 3 in the morning, whatever. He wasn't being able to do all the other
Wasn't a
things.
big drinker. Wasn't a big drinker.
Well, he was out late.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he didn't like sleep.
Yeah.
He didn't like
But you know what I
sleep.
mean?
So
Like-
a bit Keith Miller-ish, a bit Garfield Sobers, a bit Ian Botham. Didn't bother. Sleeping's, no, not good.
Was he a restless soul?
He explored. He wanted to, you know, as soon as it finishes, the stuff that, I mean, look at the age of me and him. Right, what you doing tonight? Oh, I'm going to bed. No, meet me in the lobby at midnight. What? No, I'm not going anywhere. Clubs, I don't do clubs. I'm not interested. But we go back to Accrington, when he was pro at Accrington, and he'd only be 20, 21. I mean, he rocked Accrington. He absolutely rocked it to the core as a young larrikin Australian. And he's still revered in the town. So we go a long way back. And, you know, the way that he finished commentary and off. But when he was working, and he'd turn up some morning, you'd think, good grief, where have you been? And he'd just shake his head. Right, let's go. And he'd be off again. But midway through the afternoon, so you knew he'd been on an absolute night, but he wasn't a drinker. I'll tell you what sort of a drinker he was. A glass of ale, a glass of wine, chat, put it down. And he's had a sip. Go across over here, a glass of wine, yeah, chat, put it down. And he'd move around, and he's just had a sip out of about 4 different glasses in the room. So he wasn't a hard drinking. I don't know, Keith Miller, was he a big drinker? I don't know.
I don't think Keith Miller was a massive drinker either. And Keith Miller's another important part of this, because Keith Miller was a brilliant tactician as well. Not quite on the level of a cricketer of Shane Warne, but not far off that level. And they felt very similar about Keith Miller. And you know the phrase about the Australian captaincy, don't you?
Sure.
It's the second most important job in the country.
Yeah.
Right? That was always pushed. And, you know, Australia is, I think, at its core, a conservative country.
Yeah, it is.
We pretend to be larrikins and all this sort of stuff,
very
but we are
conservative.
very much a conservative country. And so to give Keith Miller, who's off Royals and doing whatever the hell Keith Miller was doing and all that sort of stuff, to give him the captaincy would have been a big step. To give Shane Warne the captaincy would have been a big step. And it really is, it's all the other nonsense that, you know, that you need to be able to do. And, you know, we know that Alan Border and Ian Chappell and Steve Waugh were rough and gruff men at times and you know, could get grumpy. But they would go to those events and they would shake hands and they, you know, Steve Waugh would have questions and Ian Chappell was interested in things and would talk to people about things. Whereas, you know, Warne is Warne, right? It's a very different kind of thing, and I don't think he ever suited what they were looking for at any one stage.
Did you ever have to rein him in?
No, well, I didn't. No, that wasn't my job.
You were poking him.
I think the probably just, yeah, I'll do it. I didn't go last night. Oh, mate, they just keep me off. All you needed to say to him, you have a quiet one. Nah. And then he'd go into chapter and verse of where he'd been and what he'd been up to. Producers now and again, but he was a lovely bloke and he'd take it. No, none of this superstar business. Producer have got, Shane, can we just, yeah, okay, boss, okay.
What, so he would take direction, would he?
Definite,
If he
absolutely.
got the ruler out and slapped him on the
Yeah.
I think if you look at his...
without a doubt, without a doubt, yeah, without a doubt.
Was he like that as a cricketer?
Well, that's what I was going to say. If you look at his career, he had like a very father-son relationship with Alan Border. And he had a big brother, little brother relationship with Mark Taylor. I think he kind of respected authority in that kind of way. It's just that his instincts weren't to always follow authority, right? You know, but he really did have relationships. And when he starts having problems with the Australian team, it's with Steve Waugh, who he sees as more of an equal of his, and then it's with Ricky Ponting, who he sees as the kid that came through after him. So when he had that person ahead of him, he really respected them, and he had a lot of respect for the coaches. And then John Buchanan came in, and John Buchanan wasn't the kind of person that Warnie grew up listening to, so he had an issue. But generally...
There's shades of KP here, isn't there?
Yeah, there is a little bit, just a little bit.
KP went into a dressing room, and he was respectful to the bigger names in there, right?
Uh-huh.
You know, the Harmisons and the whoever. There were some big characters in that dressing room, very successful. And then maybe he felt, as the younger people came in, he maybe didn't get the respect, and maybe they went above him in a similar way.
Yeah, I mean, I've never spoken to him about that. You probably have. But there are similarities. That he became captain, didn't he, Kevin Peterson? He was captain under Andy Flower.
No, it was under Peter Moore.
Sorry, Peter Moore. So that was not great. It wasn't good. It wasn't a good combination.
But again, I think you listen to KP and the strategy is all there. But does KP have all the other things? I don't know. So one thing I would say about Shane Warne as a captain, and obviously I grew up watching him playing for Victoria, so although he probably played for Hampshire more than he did for Victoria, but I saw him quite a bit, lead teams, and then we saw him for Rajasthan Royals and then Melbourne Stars, right? So we have a good enough view to see him as a captain. He's one of the most loyal people that you will ever come across.
Unbelievable.
I remember Yusuf Pathan hit 100 at the IPL. He said it was the greatest 100 he'd ever seen. I'm like, and that's the sort of thing you can't say because everyone's like, mate, shut up. But you would see that with, he had a really close relationship with guys like Michael Clarke and Shane Watson, where, he felt like he was a paternal figure to them. He would talk up. Do you remember when he did his 50 greatest cricketers and Darren Berry was number 50?
Yeah.
Warne is the biggest fan of Darren Berry and I'm the second biggest fan. I reckon I'd struggle to get him in my top 50, right? That's how he was. And then the other side of it was when he had an issue with someone, he really did take it very personally, and and we know of the rifts between him and Adam Gilchrist, obviously, that went back to before. Adam Gilchrist was an Australian cricketer. Him and Steve Harmison never quite patched up 100% either. But when he was loyal, you listen the way he would talk about Hampshire cricketers and Rajasthan cricketers and Victoria cricketers. He was just all in on those guys, right? You never hear a bad word about any of them. That lifts a group up as well.
On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.